Hey everyone, I'm Cappy and you're listening to Beyond the Plate. This is a podcast where we sit down with the world's culinary elite to explore their journey into the food industry and the social impact they have made in their community. If you're new to the pod, welcome. If you've listened before, welcome back. We hope this episode inspires you to cook or possibly do some good today as these chefs inspire us. And we're grateful to our partners who help make this podcast a reality. With that, this episode is made possible with the help of our friends at One Hope Wine. One Hope is a Napa Valley winery built on hope and rooted in purpose. Every bottle of their award-winning wine supports a meaningful cause. What does this mean? It means One Hope's commitment to high-quality wine is as important as their commitment to the causes they support. Through the sale of every bottle, One Hope has donated over $6 million to causes around the world. Can you already see why we love them? One Hope also believes you shouldn't have to sacrifice your wallet to enjoy quality, award-winning wines. Case in point, that's why their world-class vintner collection begins at $25. How's that for affordability delivered right to your door? Speaking from personal experience, it's been delivered right to my door, and I can tell you, it is delicious wine. To learn more about One Hope Wine, the winery, and to apply to become a winery member, go to onehopewine.com. Follow them on Instagram at OneHope and on Facebook at One Hope Wine. One Hope, we thank you. This episode is also made possible with the help of our friends at Ford's Gin. All right, everyone, if you love a good gin and tonic, Negroni, or martini, or if you've been tempted to mix up a delicious cocktail from one of our Beyond the Drink episodes, seeing multiple gin bottles at a bar, restaurant, or liquor store may be a little daunting. This is why I love Ford's Gin. It was crafted by bartenders, for bartenders, and at-home bartenders alike to make a really, really good gin cocktail. Simon Ford noticed bartenders had various go-to gins for different classic gin cocktails and thought, why not make a gin that bartenders could use that would work perfectly in all of these drinks, while keeping it at an accessible price? Thank you, Simon Ford. Fun fact, the Ford's Gin bottle was created to be reused. The label easily peels off and has measurements on the back that may be used to create things like, a bottled cocktail to give to a friend or to keep for yourself. It could be used as a water carafe or for storing juices. You'll often find many restaurants and bars using them in this manner, so why not use them at home too? Here's what I also love about Ford's Gin. As I've mentioned in past episodes, during the pandemic, they gave back to the bartending community. Well, they've actually been giving back long before that. And one of the ways that hits home for me personally and the work that I do is around the issue of food waste. In 2017, Ford's Gin sponsored the Trash Tiki organization's North American tour. This included educational classes for the industry about using an anti-waste approach behind the bar through a tropical cocktail lens, encouraging bartenders to take items that may normally be destined for the trash, think citrus peels, unsold daily pastries even, avocado pits, and repurpose them to use as ingredients in drinks. Some were made into syrups, and some were made into other types of things, such as fermented drinks, for example. They then hosted consumer-facing events showcasing these drinks. Cheers to you, Fords, for always supporting the bartending community. To learn more about Ford's Gin, go to fordsgin.com and follow them on social media at Ford's Gin. Please drink responsibly. Ford's London Dry Gin, 45% ABV, Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Ford's Gin is a registered trademark. Ford's Gin, we thank you. Hey everyone, one more thing before we get going. We have some awesome Beyond the Plate merch, which you can find a link to in your podcast player or at beyondtheplatemerch.com. Head on over and check out our hats, tees, and hoodies. Again, that's beyondtheplatemerch.com. All right, enjoy this week's episode. Let's start by naming 10 of your favorite ethnic cuisines.
10 of my favorite ethnic cuisines. Number 1, I would say, is Korean. I would say number 2 is most likely Middle Eastern. I would say 3 is Japanese. 4 would be, is French considered ethnic?
Sure. That's good, though. You sound good. We're ready to rock. Today's guest is a chef and entrepreneur. She's been in love with the kitchen since cooking alongside her Korean grandmother at a young age. She was born in Southern California, graduated from the Art Institute of California in Los Angeles, and has worked with and been praised by some legendary chefs, including the late Joël Robuchon, Named Chef of the Century in 1989, no big deal. She advocates for using farm fresh, local, and responsibly sourced ingredients and has been featured in numerous publications for her accomplishments in the culinary industry. Today, she owns and operates a full-service chef consulting and catering business, but you can also find her working out and taking a dip into cold plunge pools. Please enjoy this episode as we go beyond the plate with Chef Nyesha Arrington. Let's go back to young Nyesha in the kitchen with her grandmother. Take us back.
We're going back. Okay, picture this. It's a beautiful sunny California day. There's an amazing, aromatic, beautiful Meyer lemon tree in the backyard. And that tree, whenever I think of my grandmother's house, I always picture opening that back door and seeing this pristine Meyer lemon tree. And to this day, that is one of my favorite aromas and one of my favorite ingredients to use. And actually, I have a slight segue. I have an amazing Meyer lemon meringue pie recipe that uses a ginger snap crust. And the Meyer lemon pie recipe actually comes from my dad's side of the family, but the Meyer lemon aroma comes from my mom's side. So for me, that's one of those legacy recipes that is very near and dear to my heart, which I developed over COVID. So I'm really proud of it. But yes, let's go back to the year. What would I be? About 4, 5 years old, 1987. And my grandmother helped my parents take care of me, working blue collar family. Both my parents worked. She, like they say in the Korean culture, is like a dragon mom, they call them, in that they're very, how do I say? I don't even know if strict is the right word, but like very regimented. I had a childhood where, I'd have to read books and learn a life skill, and, was very knowledge-based upbringing in my early stages of those early formidable times of brain development, which I'm super grateful for. I always remember that, just sitting next to her, doing math problems, of course, being in the kitchen and cooking next to her as often, that I can remember, that we were always in the kitchen together. I remember specifically being a kid, stepping on the step stool, and I remember learning how to blanch a broccoli, yeah. And cleaning broccoli with my grandma, and garlic. She would make tons of condiments, unlike, I think, the standard American refrigerator. Her refrigerator, I can always remember opening the refrigerator door and hearing the clinking of glass bottles on the side of the panel of the door. And there'd be these almost like tinctures of different oils and different sauces and everything that she would make, and different fermentation projects. And, it'd always be the resident garlic peeler. I would eat random things like octopus. I remember eating octopus for the first time when I was a little kid and not being freaked out about it, right? I can literally remember that when I was a kid. And we'd always just essentially boil it and cook it down and eat it with gochujang and steamed rice and a lettuce wrap, and eat very communally. And she taught me how to use chopsticks when I was young. But I would say, the media really latched on to that idea of my grandmother being Korean. Obviously, I'm an African-American woman, but being brought up from her, I feel like whenever I went to grandma's house, it was like stepping into a new world, because it was a different experience that I would get when I would be in, school and be at my parents' house, where my parents did not cook traditional Korean food. But when I would go to grandma's house, it was just this discovery, all of the time. And she was very adamant about teaching me life tools. So I'm very grateful for her, because a lot of her teachings really show up in my adult life, I feel like. And yeah, my sister and I, which we're 4 years apart, but my sister did not love being in the kitchen. So that was always really funny. And I remember my grandmother, for example, my grandmother would say oh, you're going to peel these 5 pounds of garlic. And I'd be okay, that definitely looks like it's going to take a lot of time. And my sister would not want to do it either. But I remember this sort of cognitive thinking when I reflect back on my childhood, of thinking grandma's going to make us peel this garlic regardless. So either we're going to learn how to do it quicker and fast and efficient and get it done so we can go play, or we're going to lament over it. So I think, to the point earlier I made about life tools and using those skills as an adult, I think that those little tasks help me problem solve today.
That's amazing. So smart of you at such a young age.
Yeah, I don't think I could have ever chosen any other career. I think that being a chef is definitely that like medium of self-expression.
You have one sister?
I do.
And is she still like want nothing to do with food, or is she into it?
She's not like super into it. She's a different brain. She's not a very right brain artist brain, because I think that food is that medium of self-expression and soul and legacy and all of those touch points. But she's very analytical. She's extremely like intelligent, and she's very left brain person. That's how she expresses herself.
Got it. So grandma was like usually at the house, or you were going to her house. Question. Describe your grandma in 3 words. Yes.
Number 1, I would say grace. She had a way of like almost just like floating, she's just this like entity. That's a wonderful question. Just very graceful, definitely strong, and a nurturer. Very much a nurturer.
Talk to me about mom and dad, because I saw some like beautiful posts about your dad, like being your hero and best friend and all that fun stuff. And then before this, we were talking about your family barbecue yesterday. So I want to hear more about them.
Oh, thanks for asking, Andrew. Yeah, my dad is my best friend. He and I were texting last night, and that family barbecue, I mean, we've all been through a lot in the world and 2020 and life and all the things. But I remember texting last night because I'm a pretty like athletic person, and all my little cousins and all the like grandkids and all the next generations that are coming up. It's fun because I get to, I was throwing the football around with them, and I'm a pretty like athletic person. I work out a bunch, and I just love sports. My dad was the coach of my softball team, and he got me into martial arts when I was very young. And he just has a way of being so emotionally intelligent, and he's just the type of guy that would give his last bite of food to an ant on the street, and he has such a universal perspective on life. Like I think a lot of times today, and especially in a digital age, life can seem so, compartmentalized, but also, I think sometimes it's hard to expand our mindset and understand that we are almost nothing in the perspective of our universe, right? Not to get to whatever you want to say, but that's just my perspective and his perspective. But I mean, and I have to say, he's one of the most intelligent humans that I've had the pleasure to know. And he also happens to be my dad, but he's so kind and has a way of making other people feel comfortable before himself. I mean, he's the guy puts everything before himself. And he's definitely my best friend. And, yesterday being able to put that barbecue on and be at a point in my life, financially, emotionally, like, I'm not in a restaurant every single day, like to be able to, look back on the last 20 years of my career where I didn't get to make it to every holiday. I didn't get to make it to every Father's Day or Mother's Day or family function. And to be able to provide the space for all of my family yesterday was like, it was for my mom and dad, for myself and for everyone else, definitely. But it was definitely so my family can, create those congruent memories and food data of what the human life experience is in our individual lifetimes. But I think we're on this constant pursuit to create good memories, right? So that was my goal yesterday. As you brought up the barbecue, was to create some good memories and take the photos and stuff. And yeah, he's a superhuman. He takes care of my mom, who had a stroke about 12 years ago, and he's her number one caregiver. So he works a 40-hour work week and takes care of my mom, feeds her, cooks for her, like cleans for her, and does all the things. So, I mean, he for sure, since I graduated culinary school, he's been the driving force of my entrepreneurial spirit to be the most successful I can be, to be able to help them, because, he doesn't have his brothers and sisters and parents, he has me, so I think about and want to be able to carve out a future where I don't have to worry about my parents, because it's important, I think, to be able to care for one another.
Were they always like supportive of you as you were getting into your like school and career and all that?
Yes and no.
There's been like a plethora of answers over the many seasons we've done of like ranging from every side of the spectrum, as you can imagine. So I'm always curious.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I graduated in the class of 2000. I've always been into art since I was a kid. I grew up painting and sculpting. They put me in a lot of art classes, my parents. I told my dad, I said, I want to pursue art, like paint, and he didn't love that idea. And I remember we were standing in the kitchen. I had to be about 17 years old. And I told him that. And he said, he had a really interesting point. He said, Nyesha, artists aren't celebrated until, we're living in a different time now. I feel like art's definitely a little bit more celebrated as a creative. But he said artists don't really, aren't celebrated until they pass, and they're not, and their art becomes valuable once they're not making art anymore, And I thought, oh, interesting. It's an interesting perspective. And then I thought, okay, I grew up cooking all of my life. When I was a kid, when I was 9 years old, 10 years old, I would play restaurant, and I called my restaurant A+1 good restaurant. And my dad, when I opened my first restaurant, he sat at my chef's table, and he doesn't have a very adventurous palate. He's not a person who dines in restaurants. He's a meat and potatoes guy, very simple. I cooked for him as the world knows me as a chef. John Arrington knows me as his daughter, nothing more, right? And when I cooked for him that day, it was a tearful moment, because he said he looked around my restaurant and he said, wow, Nyesha, like you did the thing that you said you were going to do when you were a kid, and because I told him, he said, what would your restaurant be? And I said, it'd be so cool to have a pantry to make different cuisines every day. And my point to your question is, when I was in culinary school, when I started going, it was very expensive, still paying off my student loans to this day.
Me too.
Right. And, I went and I pursued it. And of course, I think my parents wanted me to take the traditional route and be, a doctor or a lawyer or not that it's traditional, but just something of like,
that our parents would feel comfortable that we'd be comfortable in.
Correct. Exactly. Exactly. The least amount of struggle. And so, I think about a year into culinary school, when he saw the things I was accomplishing, and how happy it made me, and just, it goes for both my parents, and the joy that it brought me, and the opportunities that it brought me, and the places it took me. He said, wow, like, you really figured out the recipe, sort of pun intended, in life, and that's just to pursue happiness, right? And to never feel like you have to work a day in your life. That was always his big message. When we go on little like road trips, or just, have our little father-daughter moments, he was always with these like affirmations, with you will. And a few of them stick with me. I'll share them. One was, he said to me, life is like a painting, and you have the borders, and literally it's a blank canvas, and you have the capability to paint your vision in your life painting. And that always stuck with me. And also he said to always aim for the moon and hit the fence post, but never aim for the fence post and hit the dirt. And I always think about that in challenging situations, because I'm the type of person who I don't know what it is. I like put myself in uncomfortable situations if I know I'm going to grow from it, even if I know I might fail, and I do, but I think it's important to try, and the life experience is the value, is the takeaway. And I think he specifically, my mom shared with me other amazing attributes that make me a whole human, but he specifically was the driver of like that, like vulnerability, and that like relentless drive to be the best, because, that's what I saw in him, and he definitely is my superhero. And I just really am in this race to try to get to a place where I can help my family out.
You mentioned your mom had a stroke 12 years ago. Did that shift your perspective on anything like with your career or work life in general?
I remember I was at work that day when she had her first stroke. She's actually had two. And I remember thinking, like, in that moment, like, should I leave my entire team right now? And I had to be in my early 20s, where it's like, you still don't really know kind of who you are as a human, and you're still learning and collecting life data. And I've always had to kind of fight, for like my voice to be seen, to be heard, and to have respect. And like, I didn't know like if leaving would show a sign of weakness. And, I kind of kept it in when I got the call for a couple hours and was checking in with my parents. And, ultimately things kind of stabled out, and I didn't leave immediately in the restaurant that day. I waited about 2 hours and then I excused myself from service and drove out to my parents' house and was there because it was important, it was very important. I think for sure that brought our family close together. I think, I had to be like 22 or something at the time. And, at that stage in our life, I think my sister was probably 16 or 17, we're both becoming our own little adults and like leaving the nest. And so it definitely brought us back together, and we have a strong little tribe, the Arrington tribe. For me, it's interesting. I've always looked at food in one facet of my cooking as fuel and as medicine. So I'm very conscious and aware of what I put in my body. Of course, I eat for pleasure, but I also eat for fuel, and that comes a lot from my dad. I saw him do a lot of, fasting, and he'd like make his own vitamins with different like powders and stuff and make them for my sister and I when we were very little. And my mom definitely had like a different approach to food and things like that. But I definitely, seeing my mom yesterday and the joy that when she smiles, it just lights up a room. And, she's a beautiful human and very, very special to me. And, I'll always be there for her. And she's very, very strong, like soulful human. When you look in her eyes, you see like pure, like strength and joy.
Yeah, I love that. Do you still cook any of like mom or dad or grandma's recipes?
Yeah, I do. I do. I cooked a lot during the pandemic, more so than ever, and a lot for just my neighbors and people of need, and just to share because it brings me joy. It fills my cup. And I developed that Meyer lemon pie. Yeah, but I'm an explorer. I love to like learn new recipes and kind of create these like touch points that tell a story, right? So yes, I celebrate my family and their recipes, but I'm also like, I love to travel. I love to taste food firsthand in other countries and just be a conduit. Like, I think that in the small amount of time we have on the earth, like my responsibility is to, celebrate my ancestors and share my life journey with people who are fans, if you will, and then create a path for the future generations. Like, that's my connectivity.
Did you work ever? Do you remember your first job? Or did you work as a kid?
I did. I do. I remember my first job. My first job was in fast food, and I worked at a fast food chain called Taco Bell. And I value that life experience greatly. I was 17 years old. I was still in high school. I was a junior in high school. And I remember I got my first little job, and I remember how good it felt to like earn a paycheck. I loved it.
What did you learn from T-Bell that you like that took with you?
So many things. First, I remember I saved up enough money to buy my first car, like all by myself. And that felt really great. But I do remember, just life skills, like being interviewed and like, my heart pacing fast and like wanting to appear calm and collected. But really I'm like, I'd never done an interview before. It's like, it's challenging to sit across from someone and then pose questions, and you want to sound articulate and smile and do all the things and hope that you're answering them correctly, but also be honest and vulnerable. And that's a lot as a young mind, So it was my first step into adult freedom, if you will. But I remember I was hired on as, this is a funny story. I remember I was hired on as a cashier, and I remember always looking over my shoulder at the hotline and seeing the 3 people on the line, right? And, there'd be the like head person who was like the main taco person, and the like good ones could like put multiple taco shells in their hand, because you have to like stack them parallel side by side together in your hand. And then they have this like parallel scooper thing with the meat. And like, you have to be really quick. And I just remember it being in awe of seeing that. And in like, less than 6 months, I basically like made it to the line, to the like head of the line. And I was like, I did like 10 taco shells, was like killing it. And I was like so proud of myself, and, just being a leader and being happy and stoked to inspire people on the line, and I remember that was some of the formidable stages of my cooking career was at Taco Bell.
For sure. For sure. So when did you get into fine dining? After culinary school?
After high school, which is where I was working at Taco Bell. I graduated in the year 2000. And then I went to culinary school. Directly after that, I actually took maybe the summer off, about 3 months, and then came down to Santa Monica, where I currently live now, and went to culinary school. And I met a gentleman by the name of Rafael Lunetta, who had a restaurant called Giraffe. And Rafael was an amazing human, but I was tasked in one of my classes by my sociology teacher, who was an amazing human, is an amazing human. She was born to a chef. She was the daughter of a chef. She's French. She was also my French teacher. And basically she tasked the class with the assignment to dine in a restaurant alone. So at 18 or 19, however old I was at the time, I went to Giraffe Restaurant, and I walked in the back door because one of my culinary student colleagues was working there. And Dan, I chatted with him. Long story short, I ended up dining in the restaurant. I met the Chef Raphael, who would go on to change my life forever. He gave me my first surfboard and gave me a shot on the line. So I remember I was interning at Giraffe Restaurant. I was the only female in the kitchen and the only person of color. It was difficult. It was so hard. And it was fine dining, and it was very hot, and it was high pressure and high pace. And when I say that kitchen was hot, it was like abnormally hot. Like there was just the way it was structured and the way that the line was with the dish station and the downstairs. It set me up for the later luxuries in bigger, well-ventilated kitchens. But it was great. It was a great life experience. Yeah, that was my first fine dining position. I worked there for free for about a year. Through him, I met a gentleman who's his best friend, Josiah Citron, who has a restaurant called Melisse. And I went on to open 3 restaurants with him. And then I ran the line as a junior sous chef in 2006 at Melisse. We didn't have stars then, but when I was cooking on the line, we attained the stars, which was a big deal. That was definitely some of the more formidable times of sort of cutting my teeth. Anthony Bourdain was a big deal. That's when Kitchen Confidential sort of came out a few years earlier. And I remember getting that book and reading it cover to cover and then back again. And I'd never had that sort of visceral experience with a book. Like I remember reading it, like the words were jumping off the page. Like I was eating them. I couldn't understand because it just spoke to my soul so much. And then from there, I went to work for Joël Robuchon, the 3-star Michelin. And it's interesting because for me, I think the draw in fine dining was not the preciousness of the food, not the inaccessibility to everyone, because generally the 1%ers are eating there, or like, you know what I mean? So it was about the mechanics and the technical skill and level of self-discipline that it takes. Because like I said, I think I put myself in very uncomfortable situations because I understand that it's going to help me to grow. Yes, fine dining, it spoke to me, for sure. I can comfortably say now, I won't say I closed my fine dining chapter, but in the year 2019 of November, I competed in the most elite cooking competition in the world called the Bocuse. I'll back up. I was in Israel, and I want to say around August of 2019, and a gentleman by the name of Gavin Kaysen called me and said, "Hey, you're one of 3 chefs in the nation chosen to participate in the trials to represent Team USA in the Bocuse d'Or." And I said, "Wow."
You were the first female finalist of the Bocuse d'Or. Come on now.
Big
the
deal.
World Chef Championships. Yes.
Big
don't
deal.
hide this from me.
I know.
I know where you were. I know who you were with. I got it all, Nyesha. Okay, keep going.
I love a good intel. Yeah, it was a big deal. And I have to say, Andrew, on that journey, speaking to the fine dining subject, through the grueling years of what it takes to be successful in fine dining and how you have to show up every day as a human, through that competition, I mean, it's next level. I mean, you're planning every second, you and your partner. My commis, he actually moved in with me in my office from Sonoma. We turned my living room into a makeshift kitchen and just were all in. I'd wake up and go run the stairs 6:00 in the morning every day. It was just dialed in. I'll have to say, when I completed the competition on time and through a lot of hurdles, saucing those plates in front of those 10 judges, Thomas Keller, Daniel Boulud, knowing that sauce is beautiful and crystal clear, like the most delicious product I could have given you from my heart and soul. That was a pinnacle moment. I had these gentlemen's books on my bookshelves for years, and I've always looked up to them and the amount of what they've accomplished and what they've done for the culinary field. But I'll never forget those moments of like the crowd roaring and so many amazing humans came out to support. And there was just a stillness and calmness in my being, saucing those plates and setting it in front of the judges, and the elation that I felt from them, with them trying to like be buttoned up. But I'll never forget. I'm getting chills thinking about that moment. But I'll never forget, after I finished and it was done, and I could have collapsed, and tears were falling out of my face. I wasn't even like crying. Tears just like fell out of my eyeballs. Like, it was such an emotional roller coaster. We were exhausted. I was probably, but Thomas Keller walked into my kitchen and he shook my hand and looked at me in my eyeballs, and he said, "Chef, it's such an honor to watch you cook." And that for me was like a big deal,
Hell yeah. I just got the chills.
Oh, I mean, it was so beautiful, and I think in that moment I said, wow, the fine dining thing, you did it to like the top, the best you can do, and challenged yourself the entire way. So, I set in on that fine dining journey and took it to the Bocuse d'Or trials.
Did you want to do that? Did you know you wanted to do that? Or did someone like put it in your head? Like, did someone talk you into it?
Yeah. So the year prior, I'd went to France, to Lyon, to watch the competition. One of my old chefs at Robuchon competed, and I known a couple chefs who have competed. And I just started, it kind of just grew, once I went there, I watched the competition, taking the train with one of the other previous competitors and just talking through it, the excitement of USA being there, and the idea that there'd only been one woman to win it, in the 80s, like, and no women of color ever competing. I think there were a few attributes, and my competitiveness. I grew up in sports, I grew up in martial arts, and being able to exercise all of those skills, being on a team, using my medium of self-expression through food, almost having this Jedi-like mindset of where you have to think and map out your grid before you execute. And that's like a matter of seconds that cognitive thinking pattern happens, right? So I think for me personally, it exercised all of those like components for me. There is a group.
That's not for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know. That's good insight to hear, because sometimes I think, I'm like, why don't you see it like this? And it's like, oh, because I only see it like this.
Yeah. I think like chefs and cooks are amazing, like the visions they have on the line, because it's not easy to like have multiple dishes, firing and going and holding and this and that. And some are just like mechanically incredible at it. And some of them, I think like you, have like a kind of a different set of mechanics to really map that out, when it comes to like a professional competition situation.
I'm telling you, even in life, because there was a moment and I felt a little bit like, how do I say it? I was like, oh my gosh, Nyesha, we're not in the kitchen. My dad was like, we were breaking down the barbecue yesterday and he's like, oh, like I'm going to start taking this stuff to your car. And I was like, no, Dad, don't do that. We're not there yet. I was like, I have a system. And he's like looking at me like, what are you talking about? I was like, in my mind, it made total sense. I'm like, this goes here. Because it's not because it's like a control thing. It's because in my mind, it like makes everything easier throughout the entire process,
Totally. Yeah. 100%. 100%.
Yes. To answer your question, the mentor group, there's an amazing human there, young. And so I did a dinner at Melise, a mentor dinner, and she came and she tasted my dish, and it was a play on a clam chowder, this beautiful, whimsical clam chowder with like a vinjune and foam and all the things. And when she tasted it, she was like at my station, and you could feel this like energy transfer. And we kind of just kept in contact. And she said, we went to dinner, and she said, have you ever thought about competing? And I had just closed my restaurant. I was newly single, and I thought, wow, maybe this is a time for I could totally go all in on this competition, And so the thought kind of evolved from there.
Wow. So many questions for you. I'm curious, like one of those first kitchens you were in, you were saying how you were the only Black female cook. And I've seen some of the stuff you've written on how in these fine dining kitchens, some of these best kitchens in the world, it was hard. Early on in your career or later, did you ever want to throw in the towel? And what kept you going?
Yeah. One moment in particular was at my first job that I ever had. It was at the Jonathan Beach Club in Santa Monica, and early 2000s. And I remember the chef, Roland Gibert from France, he put an entire case, big ass case of bell peppers in front of me. And old school chefs made this garnish called like a confetti, basically bell pepper confetti, where it's like perfectly brunoise, just the peelings of like red, yellow, and green bell peppers. And, that spoke to my analytical brain of like making these perfect cuts and doing all the things. But like, I had to do that for like 7 hours, and it nearly broke me. Like, I remember hour 6, like I could barely grip the knife anymore because like my index finger was holding the tang of the knife for 6 hours, that same motion of like, cutting in a julienne and turning it over, making that into a brunoise. And I remember this moment. This was my first job. It was probably, I don't know, a couple weeks in. I wasn't even there that long. And I remember literally walking away from my cutting board and walking out into the hall because the back of my calves were burning so bad because I'm standing in the same spot doing the most remedial task ever on the planet, aside from peeling potatoes. And I had a whole ass conversation with myself, like, Nyesha, like, do you really want to like walk away from this right now? I was like ready to like leave because I was like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm, not learning anything. Like, these guys clearly don't respect my skill, and like, in my mind, I'm like, a chef. So I had a conversation with myself. I talked myself back into it. And that conversation was like, okay, these people are not going to break you, learn the lesson, right? What is the lesson here? Because if you can do this faster, better than everyone else, you're going to not have to do that anymore. And I got through it. And the most gratifying thing was when the chef came over and I finally finished. No one gave me shit. In my mind, I was like, oh, I'm not doing this quick enough and all. But by the end of it, he said, this is some of the most beautiful brunoise I've ever seen, and that life lesson has been the stoking of my fire, because even if you fail, if you just try to do a good job, there's going to be a lesson in it. Right. So that was the first time, but I have to be honest. Yeah. So many times I've wanted to give up, I think anyone of a growth mindset runs into challenges, because if you're not, then it's like, you're not challenging yourself enough. And I have wanted to, but I cannot picture myself doing anything else. I succeed at this because I have a relentless pursuit of excellence, you know?
Totally. Totally. So one of my favorite food writers of all time, the late Jonathan Gould, put both of your restaurants in his best 101 of Los Angeles list, being quoted in the LA Times as saying, her food tastes like LA. So I have two big questions here. One, what is that taste that he tasted? And the second one, which I can repeat if you needed, you've since closed these two celebrated restaurants. And you've said they're huge learning experiences. So I'm curious, what did closing a restaurant teach you? Like, how did you handle that?
Yes, I'll start with the lesson. And I'm now standing on my own 2 feet in vulnerability and honesty. You know, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And, you know, so I think the first one was challenging. When I opened it, people were like, wow, she finally opened a restaurant. But for me, you know, I was in no rush. You know, like I worked my way up from the bottom, from like pantry cook, garde manger, 1, 2, 3, you know, entremet, veg cook, saute, poissonnier or fish cook, viande, saucier, junior sous chef, you know, sous chef, executive chef, and then chef partner. All the other stuff, you can kind of like be under someone else's wing, right? You're supported. When you're like the partner, it's like, you know, it's a completely different skill set, right? You're like managing more than just the food. You're managing a lot of emotions, and it's almost like you're running a classroom, you know, and you're the teacher, you're the business person, you're the face, you know, you're the oil in the engine that is connecting to all the other organs, the heart, the soul, and what breathes life into it. You know, that's always something that I feel I've been innately good at. I love being on team sports, as I mentioned, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience as a kid. And when I opened Leona, myself and my partners, I was partnered with the husband and wife team. They were first-time restaurateurs. You know, I thought, wow, when I opened it, like, for me, I didn't want to go anywhere else. I thought, this is where I'm hanging out my apron, my hat. You know, 2-story restaurant. You can see the Pacific Ocean. It's in Venice. Like, it's all a vibe. You know, my community's there. I've been on the West Side for 20 years in LA. I think the biggest lesson for me was just, you know, continuing to learn a lot about myself, like what kind of leader I am, how am I taking care of myself, you know, because you have to give so much. We were running brunch and dinner, and, you know, I rarely took days off. You know, I think it affected my personal relationships a lot. And I think ultimately what I learned is how to create more of a stable foundation for myself, you know, in not a selfish way, because I think I was burning at both ends. And I don't think that creates a very whole human, you know? Yeah. And I think in the second place, I just really honestly don't think that restaurant was meant to be. You know, there was a point, in full honesty, where I looked at, you know, even the 10-year plan, and I couldn't forge it, right? Because I'm person who likes to reverse engineer. If I can see it, if I could see the goal clearly, I will make it happen. I can work backwards, put in the pillars, the brick, the mortar, the love, and I can grow it, right? And that's what Leona was for me. It was such a beautiful team, and I'm still talked to a lot of my team there. It was a very golden restaurant in spirit. I remember a gentleman walked in off the street and walked right up to the pass. And I remember watching him meander through the dining room. It was a bustling night, and no one really saw this gentleman. And I remember watching him walk in, and he kind of just stood at the chef's table, and he was like looking around. And I said, "May I help you?" And he said, "No. Honestly, I just felt the energy and the glow of this restaurant, and I wanted to feel it." And that energy exchange for me is like why I create a restaurant. It's essentially a house, right? Like, and it's built on love. Like I don't know how else to put that. And so, you know, fast forward to the second place, I learned a lot, did it way too fast, took on way too much. My partners and I were planning to open 3 restaurants back to back around the same time. We were going in way too hard, way too fast. And the soil needed to be watered. I think it was 8 months door to door of closing to opening. And I think in my mind, I was like, oh, I failed. I closed my first restaurant. I mean, I walked away from it. It ended up closing, but I ultimately had to leave because the first place as a partner and remove because it was not working out. But then opening the second place, it was too quick. I thought, oh, I need to open a restaurant. Like Nyesha needs to have a restaurant. We just did it too quick, and it was less cohesive than the first restaurant. And in full transparency, I think I probably had a lot to do with it too. I don't think that I was the best leader I could have showed up as. I think I rushed into it too quick. I think we should have taken some time. I don't think we needed to open and go in on 3 restaurants so quickly. And what I learned, again, I think is just to maintain and think about things in a very pragmatic approach is important, right? And really flesh out what the goals are and make sure everyone's goals are in line so that there's no ambiguity, there's no uncertainty. But ultimately, yeah, that building was very challenging. Our plumbing broke 4 times. We had to retrofit the piping a bunch. I learned a lot about structural things. I learned about, just all the mechanics of the restaurant, not really the food stuff. I learned about plumbing. I learned about electricity. I learned about building codes and that side more, and I remember when Jonathan Gold came in, he came in a couple times. One specific night he came in and I actually led the beverage pairing for his meal with my cicerone or sommelier. And we paired a sherry with this delicious, gorgeous crab, Dungeness crab. I'd just gotten this gorgeous whole crab in. And I kind of prepared it almost dynamite style. And he loved it. And, he passed not too long after that. I think Native was one of the last reviews he published in the LA Times, if not the last one. And it's so interesting, Andrew, how life works, because I had just been dining with him on a farm at sunset from a chef Virgilio from Central in Peru. He was doing a dinner. It's the first time that I sat and broke bread with Jonathan Gold, because it's been an entire journey, as he's always been this kind of muse, because he has a way of articulating my food, right, through restaurants and the pop-ups that he came to back in the day. I think it was 2013. I did this whole pig dinner, but he has a way of piecing together what I'm trying to convey. He nails it. And I haven't had anyone else really write about my food the way he can bring it to life. It's interesting. Marcus Samuelsson had just written this book, and I went to go, just a segue for a moment, I went to go watch him speak with Jonathan Gold. And this was years and years ago, before I had a restaurant, before he probably even tasted my food. And Marcus and I were walking, and Jonathan Gold was there as well. And Marcus said, "Oh, this is Chef Nyesha Arrington." I said, "Oh, hello, sir." And he said, "Well, I know who she is." And in my mind, I was just like, "What? You know who I am? Oh my gosh." And he's like, "Yes, I've been watching your career, and, you're doing a great job." And it was so cool. Amazing. And when he wrote about my squash dish at Leona, and he just pinpointed everything that I was trying to convey in it. He almost said it was like a Dutch still life, and the sustainability approach in it. And it's just so beautiful. Yeah, he'd always been my muse, and to sit and break bread with his family, his wife and his son, who were sitting directly across from me, and his wife was sitting next to me, his son was sitting parallel. The subject of conversation was, can a technique be essentially copyrighted, or is it the chef? Is it the chef, or is it the technique that makes a recipe? And I said, we kind of went back and forth on this, and I used the example of Robuchon, right? And the Robuchon potato, because when I would have to make that potato every service, no one can make the Robuchon potato like Robuchon does. That potato puree or mashed potato is like heaven. It's so freaking delicious. Of course, because it's equal parts butter and potato, But, it's the Laurent potato. It's the technique of drying the potato out. It's the technique of how it's cooked and riced, and the quality of butter, and the technique used to incorporate and emulsify that, and the fat content of the milk, and the temperature of the heat, and the pan that you use, the vessel you serve it in. All of those things that add up and equate to an amazing mouth experience. We had an amazing, robust conversation around that. And it was 2 weeks prior, and I thought to myself, I'd love to take a photo with this gentleman. And then my second thought was, I'd rather this moment live in my soul, because I remember the sun was going down. It was just a beautiful tablescape, long table. There had to be 30 people at this dinner. And the fact that I got that just by chance, him and I sat next to each other. He'd written about my restaurants. We had that encounter with Marcus Samuelsson, and I'd never really just had the moment to sit and eat with him. And it was so cool. And he's such a cool guy. That was the first part. Those were my life lessons. And I think, I'd love to open another restaurant. I think I don't know if it's like the third time's a charm thing, but I think, I've grown a lot. I just think, like I said, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And
was the competition after the restaurants closed and then you did the competition, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I closed Native 2019 and I traveled. It's so interesting. 2 weeks later after I closed it and made that sort of bittersweet decision, but knew it wasn't where it was like, I just knew it was not working out. There was too much mounting overhead, the plumbing, all the fixed costs, labor, all the things. It had to go to sleep. And so 2 weeks later, people reached out and wanted to shoot a kind of docuseries in Belize. So I ended up going to Belize 2 weeks later and spent 12 days there right after the restaurant closed, and connected with the people of Belize and traveled around to 4 different islands there and ate amazing food, stayed in amazing properties, flew in tiny planes, and we documented it all. It's called Through the Eyes of a Traveler. It's on the Chef's Feed platform. It's just stunning. I think that really guided and honed my perspective of who I am, because I think I'm on this sort of always evolving evolution of, finding myself or whatever, being a wanderlust and being on the journey of life. But like for me, I feel like I have a bit of an unconventional approach to what it is that traditionally a chef is to be known, because I lean into connectivity and storytelling through the lens of food, right? And because that is my passion, and because I have a competitive nature, I'm like, okay, the fine dining thing spoke to, okay, doing it at its best, right? Or most elite level. And that's open to, perspective, I suppose. Not to say that's elite, but like that idea of like opulence and, and that sort of conversation. But yeah, 2019, I think, was my hugest growth year. I being able to travel, going to Belize, went to Israel. I did a dinner in New Zealand. I went to Hong Kong. I did a pop-up in Hong Kong. And then I did the competition. So going into that competition, I just felt this lightness about myself because, I didn't own and operate a restaurant. So that was a good close to 2019. I was already set up to work from home. As I am an entrepreneur and always have this innate sense of just being able to connect and network and, make things happen, right? And do dinners and just be out in the world, right? Doing life. And then, COVID happened and I was already set up to work from home. So I think everyone had a different experience there. But yes, you asked me the 2 parts. One was the lesson.
And then the other one was Jonathan Gold. Like what is that taste that he tasted? I love those. I love any Jonathan Gold story. So also in 2019, I'm curious, maybe this came into play earlier, but it seemed like there was this wellness factor. There was like a plant-based diet that came into play. I hate using the word diet. Plant-based, eating that came into play. Like when and why did this happen? Like why did you choose that?
Well, I think that after I closed the second restaurant, that whole journey of that kind of 4 years of the 2 places and just kind of resetting. There was a huge reset for me and like removing anything on my table that was not working. Just kind of slid it off. Restaurant not working, certain relationships not working. And I just kind of, for lack of a better term, just kind of got selfish with myself and fell in love with myself, and the whole wellness thing came into the idea of like this putting my well-being first, right? So working out, I totally fell in love with fitness, and the way that it made me feel. And yeah, I was working out probably at minimum 5 days a week, doing a bunch of spin classes. I found this group of like very inspiring women who are like, CEOs and like boss babes and like all the things. And we just kind of built this community around each other that was super supportive, that I actually honestly hadn't experienced because, I will never forget this. The coach of the group of women, I said to her one day, I said, this is so inspiring to me because I think that I had always equated strength with masculinity because that's what I was around. I was only around men, and I have I'm not, no like negativity towards that. It was just my experience. I never worked for a female chef. I never was led by that. I was always the leading and most of the time leading men. So it was just an interesting, data set that I had until that group. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. These ladies are like in entertainment, CEOs of huge corporations running their own companies, wellness brands, what have you, myriad of, leadership positions. And it was so cool to see that. So it drove me even more. Right. And so and I started looking at what I was putting into my body as fuel, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, I decided to go plant-based. I've always had this connection with Mother Nature. Even when I was a kid, like I've always felt connected to our planet. Because the way my brain is wired, I always feel like I'm in search of like the nucleus. Like, what is the common denominator? Like, why? Asking the why, right? And so for me, when I was going through that thought process as a kid, I had to be maybe 12 years old, and I can remember these things. I was rollerblading in my parents' front yard, my home, and I know it sounds weird. I'm just sharing.
No, bring it. I love it.
I was like rollerblading. And I remember like feeling the sun and looking at the sun and like seeing my parents had this like 1982 red blazer, seeing that on my left and just thinking my Nyesha thoughts. And I was like, what would I do that like brings joy? Right. And it was like food. And it's like, what's something that is never going to go away? Like people always need to eat, but like, where does the food come from? Mother Nature, and so it all made sense to me. Even back then. And so I'd only really been cooking these like opulent dinners, foie gras and cream and the most, washed rind cheeses and triple cream this and Wagyu and caviar and all the things that fine dining brings. And I kind of just was like, I need to take a little respite from that, and so once I started eating plant-based, I said, wow, like my output and my mindset cleared so much that I just, again, I fell in love with how I felt. I was like up at 5 a.m. every day, just like zippy. Like my mind was so ready to, yes. And I went down a rabbit hole of like biohacking because, there's like the whole intermittent fasting thing, but it's like, if you're, eating at a certain times and how you truly fuel your body when you eat, when your body's digesting, how you sleep. I started wearing a tracking ring that tells me how much I sleep, what my body temperature is, what my heart rate is, based off of what I put in my body. And at the metrics I would get back, I was able to really analyze different data points. So I went all in on that. I think I just always want to like try to be the best I can. That was kind of the goal in that. It was like, like I've been like grinding for the last 20 years. Like, what if I put in that same effort, but like into myself? Yeah. So like, yeah, the ice baths and Andrew, like now I'm off the deep end. Like I love it so much because like, I mean, I'm like just such a like growth mindset person. So like last week I like hit my like biggest, like, sumo squat, like, which is like 185 pounds. And like, I've never lifted that much. I never was like into weightlifting. Like, I don't know. I just was like, not my thing to do, but I've now love it. And, the ice baths, a girlfriend of mine had an ice bath tank on her roof. And I went to her place. A bunch of us were just doing them on the roof one day. And I thought, wow, there's no way I can do this. Hold in the ice for 3 minutes. And when I did it, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then when I did there was a stint where I did no sugar, like zero sugar, not even natural sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol, no starch, no nothing. I was basically alkaline vegan. There's a moment, I think it was my second ice bath, I'll never forget, when I went in the ice bath and I had been learning breath work, and essentially there was nothing in my colon, in my microbiome, in my body that was digesting anything foreign, right? My body was just digesting minerals. And I remember doing my breathing exercise, and my mind went to a place where I'd never been before. And this is truest statement I can tell you of peace that I have ever felt. And I hope that I can articulate this well, because it was such an extremely beautiful moment. I leaned into my breath, and I leaned into and sort of accept the ice. And in my mind, there was deafening silence, no chaos. My mind was nowhere else except in my being, in my soul. And in my sight, I saw myself sitting Indian style, and I was at this grassy, like green, lush peak of a mountain in a vast mountain setting, sitting on a mountain. And I was seeing myself, but the vision as I was kind of this drone around myself, looking at myself in this green, lush mountain setting. And when I realized what the vision I saw, what was happening, I kind of like came to and opened my eyes and realized that I'm not in a green mountain lush setting. And
the 3 minutes is up.
It was insane.
That's
like
wild.
It was so
Very
wild.
Cool. Yeah.
So cool. And like that peace that I felt was like impeccable, right? And there's no coincidence, right? It was because my body did that on its own. I didn't, do anything to it. I gave it what it wants. So the idea that you can control those things is fascinating to me, right?
I could talk about that like for another hour. But can you share anything about the Gordon Ramsay project, Next Level Chef?
Fun. Can you believe it?
So cool. I know. I love it. It seems so cool.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be so cool. I would love to share this because, when I set out on my career, I just said, I'm going to go, right? I'm going to keep going. And it's funny because I was talking with my dad. And I was like, wait, is this the part? Like, did I do it? Like, am I there? Late last year, 2020, once things started to open up and productions happened again, I did a show called Master Chef as a guest chef. The episode was, we were sort of tasked to create a recipe of legacy, and I chose to demo for the 3 finalists going up to win the Robuchon potato. So I said, this is, and a ribeye. So a ribeye dish served with the potato puree and a beautiful petite salad, right? Because I thought this is going to be challenging. How do you know how to temperature control, sear a steak, rest, make potato puree, even something as simple as picking herbs, right? Are you going to put your herbs in water, not too much ice? Are you going to season your herb? Like, how are you finessing all? So that was the dish I chose, and I demoed it. And it was a 1-day shoot. I was there as a guest chef. And Andrew, I can't tell you, like, I've been on a good amount of sets, but to be on like a Gordon Ramsay production was like so inspiring because, in the media, he's like the gnarly pan throwing chef, all the things, which is the type of chef I generally have come up under. So it didn't scare me. But my point is that it was run like a kitchen, so it spoke to me. Like, clearly he's like the leader and everything he's saying is making sense in my brain. So I felt very comfortable, first of all. So I was able to perform with excellence and confidence. And so Gordon worked for Robuchon, Joël Robuchon. I'm demoing my dish and he's standing to my right with Aaron Sanchez and Bastianes, Joe. And I'm demoing the dish and I'm just cooking. I'm like cooking my little heart out like I do. I don't know how to half do something. They're telling me prior to when we shoot, lead the team in front of you. Like the three finalists are basically watching me demo this dish and then they recreate it. And so that's what we did. And all I can say is the energy that was like coming off of Gordon watching me cook was like amazing. Like, I don't know how else to articulate this, but he was impressed, and, long story short, we kind of connected and I was just excited to share space with him. And I didn't want to like make a big deal out of it and like go look for him and say goodbye and do all the things. So I just politely, after I was finished, I went to leave and he came like running down the hall and he like shook my hand. He was like, Chef, it was so great to meet you. And I was like, what? No, it's so great to meet you. And I like gave him a big hug. And of course, tears came out of my eyes because it was like a big moment for me, And I told him that when he came to Robuchon, when I was cooking there, it was like so cool to see him walk through the kitchen. And I was so intimidated by him because he like walked through with like very intentional and kind of just like looked at people's mise en place and like, could care less, no eye contact, but just he was there for dinner. And he just kind of came through as a guest in the kitchen. But I was like, oh, you came in my kitchen in like 2008 or 9. And I was like, oh, so cool to meet you 11 years later. And so, yeah, he's like, we have to stay in contact and, I'll have my people reach out. It's like, oh, yeah, sure. Like a couple of days later, like his assistant reached out and said, Gordon has been asking if we followed up with you. And they did. And we began a rapport. I probably had 2 or 3 Zoom meetings with them. And then we were kind of thinking of a concept of a show. We talked through a few ideas. And then this one came up. And I was in New York at the time. And the EP reached out and he said, look, this is what we're thinking. And so Next Level Chef is essentially, because, it said, like, what are you excited about? And I said, mentorship is very important to me. I would be nowhere without my mentors. And I love the idea of sharing knowledge. And so essentially, it's kind of like The Voice for cooking. We each get teams and we mentor them, through this kind of gauntlet style kitchen competition, which is really about the chef testants. But it's exciting because it's not just like chefs. It's like, now we see this new digital age and different legs of like content creators, people who have a robust food knowledge base, but they may have not worked in a professional kitchen. But so there's lots of different people competing. What can I say? I'm very excited.
Do you guys start shooting yet or no?
We shoot in a couple weeks, actually.
Nice. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So fun.
So it should be coming out early 2021.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so stoked.
Or wait, early 2022.
Early 2022.
Yeah, got it. I want to get into social impact and giving back, but the question that I didn't plan on asking that I'm going to ask because you said to your dad, is this it, Dad? Is when did you know that you made it as a chef?
Well, you know what? I know this about myself. I'm notoriously humble and I don't know if like I'll ever quote unquote make it. Like I think I'm such a student of life. Like I'm just so grateful to like have air in my lungs and like do my passion every day. And like hopefully like my goal is to just be able to create and captivate, people. Like I think everyone needs like something to inspire them, and I would love to help be that person, for people to actualize their dreams, because I don't think it's only really in the culinary space. It could be in any aspect of life. But I think people, if they just know that someone's like rooting for them and they really have their back or they see another story and they're inspired and they can apply that to their life, I think that's really where I'll make it. Like that for me it's invaluable. That is invaluable for me because my goal is not to be the most famous person on the planet, right? I hope people recognize what I'm doing, what I've done for the industry. I hope there's praise for that. But my goal is not to be famous. My goal is to make an impact, and and to share. Yeah.
So, which perfect segue. We started earlier. I was explaining like why we started this podcast. I believe chefs are way more than a delicious dish that we see on a plate in a restaurant or on a, our TV screen. So I know you are active with a number of projects and organizations, and I know the issue of hunger is important to you, as is mentorship, as you just talked about. But can you elaborate a little bit about food insecurity and your mentorship work in LA or beyond?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier in the pod, I've seen a lot of waste in fine dining, right? Because when people are paying $500 a person, there's allowance for food waste, right? So like I've seen us at times be asked to take an entire beautiful side of fish, and you're only really using the center cut, right? And the rest goes in the trash. And it's like, that literally blows my mind, literally blows my mind. And it's quite irresponsible. I have to say, I have such high hopes for the amount of impact that I can bestow in my lifetime, because it seems simple, it seems like the equations are there, and I get there's a lot of layers and bodies of governing people that make the rules. But I think these days, as I've kind of come out of the fine dining world, I just really want to use my passions and accessibility to my network to help people, right? Because I don't think people are helpless. I just think that a lot of people don't have the know-how to create opportunities for themselves, And I'm specifically talking about, places that might not have the best quality food, because at the end of the day, if a kid who's 7 years old has to go home and help take care of his grandmother or her grandmother and eat top ramen for dinner and maybe not have a breakfast, or maybe have a Coca-Cola for breakfast, is not going to have the same amount of brain power and cognitive thinking as a kid who had an apple and oatmeal and an orange juice for breakfast and got an amazing, comfortable night of sleep and a hug and a kiss and has a tutor. It's just, and I think that if I could help, I'm not saying take away from anyone else, right? But I think that there's been a long lane of that opportunity to be given to one person than the other, So I think it's important to try to help people who don't have access, I am very passionate about donating my time and my resources to those causes as much as I can. Absolutely. I feel it's my duty.
Yeah. Are there specific organizations you want to call out?
Yeah, I think, Food Forward is amazing. I think LA Mission is amazing. I spent some time down there a couple weeks ago, and I think actually going to these places is really the jarring thing, because, I live in Santa Monica. I live by the beach. I'm in my bubble. Like I ride my bike to the beach when I get bored, like when I go to downtown LA, it's like a completely different setting. You see people like impoverished, and it's like, it's insane. So, at LA Mission, when I went there's a line around the block of like people who are living on the streets. And it's like, I wonder the backstory of, and the pain that these people feel every day. It's like food has such a powerful way of being a healing mechanism. And I think, ultimately we could, it's not about like everyone says change the world. I don't think this has to be this big to do. I think it could be in small increments, to create this like reverberation of this kind of cause and effect.
Yeah, love it. All right, let's do a quick speed round. And then
let's go.
And then we'll close it out. Question 1, what did you have for dinner last night?
Last night, oh my gosh, this is so funny. So I spent the whole day, I smoked the most delicious baby back ribs. I made 8 racks of ribs. Cousins brought all kinds of food. We had a mac and cheese contest. We had all things. I barely even ate at my own barbecue. I think I forgot to eat because I was entertaining everyone. And so I totally, at like 9 o'clock last night, and this is so not plant-based, I ordered tacos. I ordered a couple potato tacos, and then I got a cheese enchilada, and it was great. And I was so stoked about it. Yeah, that's what I had for dinner.
Awesome. Name a smell in the kitchen you love.
Ooh, oh my gosh. I love brown butter. When you make brown butter, that aroma that permeates those like delicious caramelized notes, there's nothing like the smell of brown butter.
Yeah. Name a smell in the kitchen you hate.
A smell in the kitchen I hate. Pass. I need to think about it.
All right. What pisses you off in the kitchen?
A not sense of urgency, carelessness. Specifically, this is really granular. Not folding your towel. Like, fold your towel. You have to fold your towel in your kitchen. It's like, you'll never see me set a towel down and not fold it. I do it at my own home.
So funny. So funny. What makes you happy in the kitchen?
What makes me happy in the kitchen is the bustling sounds of service. I mean, it's like an orchestration, and it's like a beautiful musical, right? When you can like hear the clanking of the way like a spoon touches the edge of a pan, or the sizzling of a beautiful steak, or, you know, the sound of the Vitamix. You can almost know what is being cooked or prepared by the sounds of the kitchen. And all of those like layers on top of each other are so magical.
Yeah, I love it. All right, let's close it out with the final question. Throughout this time we've been talking, and on your social media, you talk a lot about like people's legacies, trailblazers in the industry, icons, legends, and you've definitely touched upon this throughout, but what would you want people to say about your career, like about your legacy in the food world?
I would want people to say that I led and created an unconventional approach to cooking and chefing, what it is to be a chef. Because I think before it was, you don the chef coat, you may wear a toque, you get a great write-up in your restaurant, people patron your restaurant, and that's the recipe. Now, it's not. I think, you know, I've done so much, you know, from fine dining to the elite cooking competitions of the world, to going on tour with Stevie Wonder and cooking for him, and seeing a truly, for lack of a better term, magical human being, just being able to be in contact and have conversations and share space in the same room of people who are living in their purpose. I would like to say that, you know, people who say that she always led her own path.
Chef, this was awesome. I loved it. I know quite like a good amount of the folks that we talked to on the podcast. I don't think you and I have ever like formally met in person, but like seeing what you've done and scrolling through your social media and how you write and how you share and the energy and joy and love that you spread is awesome. Like hearing about that random guy on the street coming into your restaurant, like I get it. You know what I mean? So thank you for your time. Thank you for the joy you spread. Thank you for your voice and the work you do to help people in LA and way beyond. Best of luck on shooting, and I hope we get to hug one day in person soon.
Same. This was quite enjoyable. I love sharing dialogues, but this has been very lovely, and your spirit really yields a great result because I feel comfortable. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks again to Chef Nyesha Arrington. Find more on her at nyeshaarrington.com. To learn more about Food Forward, go to foodforward.org. And for the LA Mission, check out losangelesmission.org. Find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media platforms at On Cappy's Plate, or go to beyondtheplatepodcast.com. Beyond the Plate is on all the socials at BT Plate Podcast. This episode was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joe Yetton, and Shant Petrosian. Our digital media is by Sarah McClellan-Mead. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Find him at iGoldford. As always, special shout out to my wife, Katie. Please rate, review, and or subscribe to this podcast on your listening site of choice. Don't forget to join us next Wednesday for an episode of Beyond the Drink, our companion podcast of Beyond the Plate, presented by Ford's Gin. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.